All right, so I guess at the end of the last episode, we were kind of talking about awareness, or saying that we need to talk about awareness and then choice.
Mm-hmm. That's where we left off, more or less.
Yeah.
Awareness and choice.
So, I mean, I guess it seems to me that, like, awareness can kind of go on, like, for levels, so to speak. It's like you can be aware. You have, like, just a general awareness that you're alive, right?
Sorry.
And then you have an awareness, but you can have an awareness of your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, and further back than that, like, is awareness an automatic part of being a human? Or are some people, I mean, some people would claim, you have no self-awareness, or that person is completely unaware, but I think I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, so, okay, that's an interesting thought, or a place to go. So if somebody says you have no self-awareness, does that mean that they don't have a filter on their thoughts?
Right. Well, I guess to your point, it doesn't mean that they're not aware.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a different thing, right? That's more of like you're selfish or you're self-centered. So to answer my question, awareness is some inherent thing. We are aware, right? Or otherwise, wouldn't we trip down the steps? Or run into the wall?
Yeah. So is the base level you have a sense that you just have a sense that you are? Like,
yeah.
You just have
something.
Like you experience life. So there's an awareness that you experience life.
Yeah, you filter external stimuli through your senses. I mean, or are we talking something different? Maybe awareness, because awareness seems to be a product of sight, smell, taste, touch, whatever the other one is, hearing.
So,
or is it something?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's the way we bring in the physical, material world into us, right? Mm-hmm. That's our devices that we bring in information from the outside world.
Yeah, as far as I can tell. And then maybe there's more.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we know about.
And then so this is what I guess this is where I would say about it. So we bring stuff in, and that is factual information received, but immediately we process it.
Yeah, sure. We spin it.
Right. We process it somehow. And then that's where, so what I would call like the illusion of separateness begins, right? Is that we put it's our viewpoint or our perspective on it, right? So if you smell, if we had apple cider brewing, right? Mm-hmm. And you like apple cider, you think it smells great. But somebody probably doesn't like apple cider, and so they don't think it smells good.
Right.
Right? And, so what is happening is the nose, the olfactory sense is bringing in the scent, but then we decide whether we like it or
your
not.
brain gets involved in the nervous system.
Right, okay.
It's beyond just
And so this kind of goes back into last week. We were talking about the 5 levels of attachment with Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. So the first level, so in his system, is the authentic level. That would just be bringing it in and not making a judgment on it at all.
Right, sure.
And then the preference level is probably the only place it gets to with apple cider, right? Hopefully, right, is that you have a preference.
It's either good or bad or whatever. Or it brings back memories. It triggers you from some childhood event or whatever it does.
Right. And then, so the next level up in the 5 levels of attachment, authentic, preference, identity, I suppose maybe somebody in the world reaches that level.
Well, I'm someone who likes apple cider.
Yeah.
You could be that into it, or it could be that important to you. Like, if you heard bluegrass music, if I heard bluegrass music in a public place, I'd be like, I would have maybe that level of attachment to it to be like, this is me.
Right,
like,
because
I know more about this than other people or whatever. This is going to be, so I can see where.
Because you play bluegrass.
Yeah, because I experience it, I know about it. I can sit here and talk to somebody for 3 hours about it. It's more than just a passing experience. Not that it matters, just.
So,
further
okay.
that
So I
example.
think maybe then is the thing to say about awareness is that the next step of awareness then is that you are aware of your level of attachment to it, your judgment about something. Where am I at?
Yeah.
Yes, I do choose to like this. Or so it's easy for me to always think about sports teams, for the levels of attachment.
Yeah, sure.
Because you could be watching a sports game. This is kind of what you've been talking about in a couple of your more recent episodes of Knowledge Plus Experience Equals Wisdom, right? Is talking about like going to your daughter's soccer game. And it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're rooting for your daughter. But you have no attachment to like the greater whole of the game,
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just like you're just going to watch her,
Yeah.
and like you were equally happy when the other team scored a
Yeah, that
goal
was
and they were
bizarre,
happy, right? Yeah,
I couldn't help it. I just was. It was like, that was a good play.
Well, that's
in
very
the context of the game.
yes, that's very authentic. That's a very authentic level of attachment to it, of watching it, right? And then so the identity level, and so this is where I get into, or preference level. Is obviously you were rooting for your daughter, right? Overall,
I
right?
want them to win, sure.
Yeah, and so that's a preference level. Identity, I don't think you were there, but you could have been wearing, or I don't think you were doing this, but you could have been wearing the school's shirt, saying Abingdon Soccer or whatever. And then the next level is internalization. And so this is where I get in trouble as a football fan, is I go from identity into internalization, where if my team loses, it can potentially ruin my day. And sadly...
No, I don't think that's sad. You just shouldn't judge it. I mean, it's
well, yeah, then I'm judging my judgment.
Right. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, so that's the way I feel. And then, of course, the next level up in those 5 levels of attachment then is fanatical. And that's where, of course, the problems really lie in the world, right? Even at a sports fan level, if, like, the person... Well, people have killed themselves after their team lost. Or there was a story in Don Miguel Ruiz's junior books about a bus driver drove into a group of fans of the other team, right? So he had reached the fanatical level of attachment as a sports fan, or the person that commits suicide over their sports team. Now, obviously, there might have been a whole lot more going on.
Yeah, at that level, I think it's pretty complex. I don't know that that's the logical end point of... awareness.
That was the straw. That was the straw that broke the camel's back in that case. All right. So here's my thing though about all awareness and thoughts. Like, so we don't know where, like, because some thoughts just seem to appear, so to speak, in your head.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Where do they come from?
Epiphanies and right.
Yeah, and so then, but then also we have thoughts about our thoughts. Clearly, right? So a thought may seemingly just come.
Like, I should not look at that girl's butt because I'm married.
Right. Yeah. So you like something else comes to you. But see, the thing that seems to me is all of it doesn't matter exactly where we have thoughts or why we have thoughts or what level of awareness, so to speak, or consciousness.
Right.
It's that we have a state of being that we are demonstrating potentially on a moment-to-moment basis, that we have a state of being that we are coming off of it, right? So it doesn't matter where our thoughts come from. Like,
that's a whole other.
Yeah, so that's to me what matters most. Then is how am I being based on my thoughts? Whether I knew exactly where they're coming from, or is it exactly my thought, or is that my judgment, or whatever?
Yeah,
how am I?
So, like, how are you manifesting the thought into some physical physical expression, right? Is that what you're saying? Like, how are you translating the environmental stimuli from simply existing in kind of the metaphysical antimatter space of your brain, your awareness, maybe it's not just your brain, into something that affects other people?
Right. Okay, so we would have thoughts. And then we can take our thoughts and we can put them into words.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Or maybe our thoughts are in words already, but now we have more thoughts.
Interesting.
We have words. We put our thoughts about our thoughts into words.
Right.
Right? Even if it's alone in our own head. or we're writing it, let alone talking to somebody. But then our words can become our deeds. Thoughts, words, and deeds. Right?
And your beliefs and your identity and all those other things, right?
Yeah, right.
And
well, and I guess that would be, so the deeds, would that be beliefs? That is, like, that's the way...
The belief, I think it's like the deed can come immediately after the thought, but the repetition and sort of the nurturing and the like gardening of that belief repeatedly through time, or that action through time, can become a belief, right?
Right.
The repetition habit.
Right.
Man, that's fascinating.
So, okay, so then we have, so you have your thoughts, words, deeds, you develop your beliefs, your patterns, your behaviors, habits, right, after it. And of course, so that's what, to me, I think patterns, we've touched on patterns a bit, and I think that patterns are so important because, so for my money, evil doesn't exist, right? The pattern of behavior that we typically identify as evil,
right,
that exists.
Yeah, right.
That exists, right?
That's beautiful.
So the patterns exist, right? And we can see them repetitively or whatever. And this is why I think political parties can seem like they're in cahoots even, because the same patterns of behavior are just being displayed.
Oh yeah, right. Just different.
Yeah, so it's
different flavors.
Right. It's coming to some from the same. It's the same pattern.
Or the psychologists would call that, like, instead of pattern, they would call it a modality or a model, right? And I love that because that's what I do in science. Is I sort of go, well, this sort of systems thinking applies here. Can we just lift that pattern model out of this and put it over here? And look, it still works. Even if it's just the idea of a system versus individual parts, right? The idea that most things are systems of interacting parts,
right,
is a pattern that you can apply. Oh, look, it works in everything.
Right.
Nothing really exists in isolation.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I mean that's what we've been talking about, like, a lot. That everything is interrelated, interconnected, and interdepend on one another because of that, right? Because they cannot operate.
Yeah, and that's a pattern that works across space and time,
right?
Matter, antimatter, whatever.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And so, like, that's where we're kind of talking about, like, a developmental pattern.
Yeah. Right.
Is that right? Is it builds up?
Yeah.
And then
same.
The more complex the pattern is, the more individual parts there are towards it, or can be broken down more.
Probably,
right?
Yeah.
But then also the more parts that can go wrong.
Sure.
On it, right? So the more complex something becomes, the more areas that something can go wrong, right?
And probably the more redundancy is built into the system because of that.
Okay.
Because more things can go wrong, there's probably going to be 2 or 3, 4, 5 things, so that one goes wrong. Both these other 4 things kind of do the same thing, so they just move in. Right. But that's what's like why there's so many species, right? People argue that species are redundant. You got the same 12 birds out there that all eat the same thing. They all do the same job in the ecosystem. Why? Well, part of the reason, the theory, is redundancy. If 2 of those birds go extinct, you got 4 more that still eat the berries that otherwise would, like, poison the ground and not let trees grow or whatever. So redundancy is built into complex systems to account for what you're saying. Okay.
That's
a complete tangent, but
right. Yeah. Probably more complex today than we want to. Well, let me. So I just said that evil. I say evil doesn't exist.
Yeah, that really lit me up.
And I mean, so what? I mean, what do you think about?
Well,
that?
I've just been thinking about this recently. Again, after reading that Rutger Bregman book, Humankind, I'm pretty convinced now that people are not inherently evil. The argument I've been wrestling with is my experience in Hawaii and learning about this long history of just evil that seemingly in the world, all you hear about in history is wars and fight and tough, and this king was better than that king, and so that's why he won, and we love him because he won. Or what? And it's like, why all the war? Especially in somewhere like Hawaii, where you're like, what's there to fight about? This is beautiful. Let's just whatever. And so that got me thinking about good versus evil. Are we just inherently evil? Left to our devices, are we going to be like, hey man, what's up? I'm going to kill you because, that's how I win. And I'm convinced that that's not true, but I had never thought that evil doesn't even really exist.
Right.
Or that it's not in the way that we think, because of the way you explain it. It's some pattern of belief system that leads to an action that is evil. But the evil stimulus, it wasn't like A to B. It was like A to B to C to D to E to F to G to H to I to J. Oh, look, and then I'm beating somebody up.
Right. Yeah.
So that's cool.
So okay, so
I
this
can get
is
behind that.
so when I'm thinking about like the idea of an ego, and I've said that the ego is necessary for us to experience life as a unique and separate entity from all other unique and separate entities, right? Okay, so you have to have something that distinguishes you. So you need the ego in that sense. Okay. So then the problem is what I see is that ego then is the cause, though, of much of the suffering between humans, and we can say between human and any sentient being or even the environment, right?
Sure.
So there's going to be problems that we deal with that are beyond the scope of a human power, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
A tornado, an earthquake,
Oh, yeah, sure.
a weather, whatever kind of weather problem, right? Okay, so that's beyond the scope of human impact. Like the human didn't cause that on another human.
Right.
Okay. Now, so what my goal was then for myself was I want to eliminate all the actions that I can be consciously aware, so to speak. So I want to consciously be aware to remove the actions that what I'm doing that are going to cause some degree of what we'll just call suffering on another person, right? So how does my actions causing suffering on another person? So that's what we want to eliminate out of the ego, right?
Yeah, or I would say reduce, because
Well, yeah, I mean because you can't.
It's just eliminating
all.
Such an absolute, yeah.
Well, right, yeah, okay. Well, and so that's so important because I think it's worth talking about here that one of the reasons why you can only reduce it is because you can't know all aspects of everything to make the right decision.
Where you can't possibly have all the information.
Right. Yeah. So you can't make the exact right decision, but you can do the best you can. So this is what. How did we say it last week? Like we're going to. So we're orienting ourselves towards the truth. Well, this is what I was saying. I said, why would you ever choose?
Yeah.
Why would I ever choose the bad thing, the evil thing?
Right. So you always think you're choosing the right thing because that's what you want to do. Because why would you ever say, I don't know, probably kicking that guy in the nuts is,
right. Well, and
okay.
So of course, as you're younger, and then this is like a developmental thing because I think at a time. I think that's just your first thought is that so your ego feels attacked in whatever way, right? So you want to get back at the person, right? The fight or flight, the fight side of that, certainly.
Thing, yeah.
Okay, so you want to get back at the other person, and so you act on that. Typically, a younger human is going to do that more commonly. But I mean, it's happening.
Some people never learn.
And so if you have developed at all that you become aware of your thoughts. So you go, okay, when I think that I want to harm the other person in a way, I'm choosing to do that. Well, why would I choose to harm another human? Would I want that person to choose to harm me?
And I think the answer to that is simply because I'm so overridden with these biochemical sensations that I can't think clearly. The fight or flight thing. It's like all of a sudden all this juice is poured out of one part of your brain that's, all about just do this. and it becomes difficult to see. Which is why whenever you start going down that path or I hear this, I think this is why we meditate.
Yep.
Because it gives us the power to control or to be aware of our awareness.
Yep, right.
And that's what I've got some notes like to add something later to what you stuff. It's like how do we sort of take awareness and then, or how have other cultures and religions sort of dealt with awareness and said, here's how you teach yourself or here's how you learn to do what you're saying, to buy yourself the time to have a choice, to make a choice that reduces suffering in what happens, like to control your actions. That's a mastery, right? That's a life's goal.
Yeah, right.
and it takes training.
So it takes training. So you got to be aware to do it. You make the decision. And I think a lot of people have that sense, though, that something needs to be different. Well, what needs to be different is your behavior, right? And then our collective
because
behavior...
you certainly can't change anything. That's the thing you have control over.
Right, is yourself. Right. So you have to control. And then you have your reaction to anything. Because, so no matter what, okay, if you experience something directly, between you and I, if we have an experience where we're at the same location and we have the same thing, we've experienced that together, and then we each have thoughts on that event. So right now we're experiencing this. We're recording. We have a computer here and all the things that are here, and we're experiencing, and then we're having thoughts about our thoughts. To potentially emotions. That probably I don't like now. Am I emotional? Per se.
But there's always emotions happening.
So something is happening. Because even afterwards, after we're watching the video and going, oh, yeah, well, it didn't really do as good. You're kind of not satisfied with something, or whatever. So you have that feeling. But if you tell me a story of something that happened with you and your wife and one of your daughters or all your daughters or whatever, right? And you tell me a story, I still can have thoughts, opinions, and emotions about that, right? Even though I didn't experience.
Oh yeah, right.
So you're always the center of every experience you have, even if that experience is hearing the story just hearing a story.
Wow. So that says to me what you described as a couple of things. One is like awareness has what I always call a flavor, like a direction, right? Your awareness can be toward a good or evil sort of expression, let's say, whether it's words or written word or spoken word or actions, like what you were saying. But it can also have like a magnitude. I guess everything has a magnitude.
Like a degree of it.
Yeah. So when you tell me a story that's something that you experience, I'm not going to be able to have the same intensity experience as you, but I could probably have like some subset of that. Like half the magnitude of the experience, and that you can have experiences vicariously without actually having to like physically go through the actions of doing it.
Right.
So that man. What a master. I don't know if that's the right word. what amazingly complex thing our brain is.
Oh yeah. Well, and so so back you had said, speaking of master, like you talked about mastery, like so we constantly in this life then have. Like it would be. We've talked a little bit about like the idea of enlightenment again. It's not like enlightenment is an absolute final state. It's a process. It's a slider switch, right? You know what I mean? And you're constantly experiencing new things in life to demonstrate your mastery, so to speak, of your emotions, of your mind, of your. Really, it would be of your attachments. You can demonstrate the mastery of your attachments, to something. And it doesn't mean that you don't like something. See, I think that's one thing. Too many times people think that, like, the idea of enlightenment is that, like, you're, like, just everything's just one big blob, and you're emotionless. Right. And it maybe that, like, a master... somebody like Thich Nhat Hanh, right? He evidently got mad, and I think sometimes we think like, well, the master's not going to get mad,
right? Well, it's like we don't achieve some new existence,
right?
We still have all the same things. It's just
what
you're saying.
Right?
We're doing something differently internally to process the same.
Okay, so let's talk about this, because you just said, because you don't achieve a different existence, right?
And we're still human.
We're still human.
Like,
and that existence, we've talked, you have an awareness of it, and then you can demonstrate, because of that, you can demonstrate a state of being within that. Fair?
Or represent, or sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's my thing, and maybe this will get into 2 or 3 episodes here just today. But so the idea of heaven, to cut to the chase, idea of a heaven to go to, is that requires a state of awareness too. Some sort of awareness.
Absolutely,
if you are in that place, that you have to somehow be aware of it, right? And so let's just get some of the things that somebody could get hung up on here. Okay, so heaven requires that there is some degree of an afterlife to what we're talking about. Now, that's a definitive answer, whether there is an afterlife or not. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
I love unanswerable questions.
Yeah. And people have had experiences, what we call like near-death experiences, or an NDE, near-death experience, or maybe they've had a past life regression and they talk about, previous experiences, which as a side note is complicated because of time existing only in human form.
Well, yeah, it's non-testable, non-scientific evidence that these things have happened, but still evidence.
Right.
Some form.
So, okay.
You can't do anything with it.
For the sake of argument, yes, it is true that we can't say definitively there is an afterlife. Okay. But if there's not an afterlife, I don't care because we're still here right now. Right? And we still have this moment. It almost makes it more important.
Yeah, right. Or less important, depending on... More important to live, less important whether or not there's an afterlife.
Yeah, right. Well, okay, right. So it doesn't matter. So for my money, for what it's worth, I do believe that there is an afterlife. I think there is some sort of continuity. For lack of a better term, I would say that our soul continues on.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's
okay. For lack of a better term, whatever you want to call it, right? An essence, a soul.
Well, I would say awareness.
Right.
Right? Or, at the most non-denominational level or secular level.
But there's something.
Yeah.
And again, it wouldn't matter what that is if it goes on. If there's something goes on, it doesn't matter what you call it. It's the something that goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's some sort of then experience, awareness of that time. Okay, so I think that's important just to clear up. Yes, that's true. Okay, so going with the idea that then there is an afterlife, it would be, so first it would be infinite. There's almost 8 billion people in the world. We could get 8 billion different ideas of what heaven is. Or afterlife, right? Yeah. Not even using the word heaven. But to talk about then that afterlife as a potential heaven, which is an experience, or I don't want to say an experience, and I will say, just call it an idea for right now, of several religions, right? That there is a heaven to go to. Now, taking all the ideas out right now of how you get there.
Well, there's the gate. And then one of the saints or something has a book, right?
Yeah, well, right, yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. And, well, okay, so, I mean, a lot of...
Yeah, but
the Christian idea...
just get rid of all the metaphorical sort of...
Yeah, I mean, there is a way... There would be the theory that there is a way in. That you have to do these things to get in.
And that theory could be that there are no things to do. That it just happens no matter what.
Yeah.
Too.
Right, and well, that would be another theory, that we're all going the same... place, right? Okay, it's all that it doesn't matter. Typically, we live in a predominantly Christian area and country, really, for that matter. The Christian perspective is that there is a definitive way to get in.
Right.
Okay. I don't want to talk about that because that's not worth arguing here. But let's talk about, okay, what if there is an afterlife, whether you call it a spiritual realm, an astral realm, or heaven? Okay, what does behavior look like? When you hear heaven, you weren't raised in a religious home at all. So what do you think of? What is heaven?
It's funny. I don't think of any of that talk as having any meaning any more than like when I heard Aesop's fables and like the tortoise and the hare.
Okay.
Like I've never, ever even entertained the idea that any of it had any real meaning. But what I have thought about is, well, what's the point underneath? And the only thing I've really gotten to there is that, well, people don't like death, and so we need some way to feel better about dying. So traditional religions haven't really affected me in a spiritual way at all. I've been able to think about those things on my own and sort of think about indigenous cultures pre-Buddhism, pre-Christ, pre-all that stuff, and just sort of think, were we scared? Were we even scared of death in the first place? No. So I don't think, to me, none of that stuff really counts. But I'd still have thoughts about what you're saying. And I'm pretty much in line with everything that you're saying, just that none of the stories weigh into it. at all for me.
Right.
Because it's almost like they're talking about two different things.
Yeah.
Like the idea of heaven from Christianity, to me, it has nothing to do with afterlife or death. It has to do with earth and our panic at not wanting to watch our loved ones die or whatever and make us feel better so we don't have to deal with it.
Yeah, so...
It's pacifying.
Right. Oh, yeah, okay.
Doesn't have anything real to do with actual what happens.
Right. So it's like because of the fear of life ending, it's something that happens that somehow...
Or even more generally, fear of the unknown.
Fear of the unknown.
This is a little heroin. Oh, are you worried about dying? Here, I'll shoot you up with a little Jesus. And then you won't feel bad anymore on Earth. You know, I really literally have never made any connections between when I think about what happens after death and any of the organized religions that I know anything about. Maybe Buddhism a little bit, and maybe the Toltecs a little bit, but I picture more like 6,000 years ago, there's a village and they're out at night and they've eaten and they're making a fire and somebody's like, man, Ted died last week. What fills that space?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Same thing, story.
Right.
Story to make everybody feel better.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I certainly get like that. So
I can't relate, I guess, to a lot of the the specifics about what other people think about.
And that's probably good though for a lot of reasons and for the sake of like balance kind of here for us. So I was raised Roman Catholic. The Roman Catholic idea would be, generally speaking, I'm trying to keep it simple, is that if you were baptized, then you're getting into heaven. Okay, fair enough. One of the things when I was probably in my 20s, I started realizing everybody kind of talks about heaven, like, oh, things are going to be better in heaven. There's not going to be suffering. There's not going to be pain. So to speak then, if there's no suffering and pain, that would mean all of our needs are just met.
Man,
right?
Talk about boring.
So that's a place to get to here. I mean, for sure. Let's hold on to the boring idea. Right, so there's no pain, there's no suffering, all your needs are met. And it's seemingly then the way you like it, because how does that work if it's like, I love snow. I don't love snow, but suppose I did. So I love snow and I want to go skiing, and that's like what's going on.
Yeah, right. It's just none of it makes any sense.
It's all the time. But you love the beach and you want sun.
Yeah.
So it started being like, wait a minute. So heaven can't just be a one-way thing, because it's more everybody's kind of individual preferences of what is the best.
It's like a plug-in virtual reality machine.
Yeah. And then so to the boring point, there's that great episode of The Twilight Zone where he's like a gangster, gets shot by the police, and then he dies and he goes someplace, and the dude that greets him is dressed in all white, and of course that's kind of leading.
And he is white.
And so he's a gangster. The gentleman that got shot, his name's Rocky in the episode, I believe. So he gets shot,
of course,
and he is. He realizes that he can have whatever he wants.
Yeah.
He can have whatever he wants. And so he wants to win money gambling, and he's smoking, and he's drinking, and he's got women all around him, right? And so it goes on, and they show him, doing these things, of course. And then he kind of starts questioning it. And he wants to see, they had said something about like the file. So he gets to look in the file of his life. And of course he sees all the things he's done wrong. Right, as a person, like whatever, kicking a dog. I don't remember the exact thing, but doing something not good as a human. And then so he kind of goes, well, he says something like, if it doesn't bother the big guy, it doesn't bother me. And he puts the file in and he goes on. Well, then, of course, he's continually getting nothing but women, smoking, drinking, and winning. And then they show him like putting a coin in a slot machine, and he doesn't even look, because he knows he's going to win. And he walks away and hits the jackpot again. And finally, he starts questioning his guide, right? The gentleman dressed in all white. And he's like, I don't get it. I don't deserve to be here. I want to go to the other place. Thinking that he's in heaven. That he's meeting all of his needs, right? But he is in the other place.
Wow, that's cool.
Because nothing is challenging him. So it's boring. So he was boring because he got everything all the time, right? And then, so here's my other thing on on heaven that I want to see what you think is, so the idea of a heaven where there's no suffering, and I get for somebody that has a family member or themselves, say, are handicapped or have been injured in life and they've lost a leg or maybe were born without whatever sight, hearing, anything. I mean, literally anything. That we're going to be complete and whole in heaven. That's awesome. I love that view. Okay. That's not what I'm talking about, though, exactly here. Is that the things that we generally say are good characteristics of a human on earth. Something like generosity, compassion, empathy, sympathy. Just as a few, right?
Yeah, that's great.
We could name others. Well, if all needs are met, there's no reason to demonstrate generosity there.
Oh, yeah.
If there's no suffering, we don't need compassion or empathy, right? And so those things don't exist there necessarily because there's no suffering caused by other humans, other beings, whatever being is there, right? It doesn't matter what you call it, right? There's no suffering caused by other people because there's no lack. There's no lack of needs. Now, of course, I get it. That are we in a physical body there? And do we need
whatever
food?
needs, it might be some different.
Do we need sleep? Do we need shelter?
Right.
The way we need it here. Okay, that's all fair enough to debate, right? And we don't know. But what we do know is that we need those things here.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
Okay. So now, so as a goal then is I do not want to demonstrate any behavior that leads to suffering in another human. And man, that's hard because, I mean, just even looking like close, I don't know where this was made by any means, but was it made in a place that would be considered, at best a sweatshop, right. If not straight slavery, and how that, and so am I contributing to the suffering in that way? I drove a gas car over here today. Is that somehow contributing to the suffering as a whole? Man, those things are complex.
Yeah.
But so that's my thing is, so all of that aside, then I don't really care if there is a physical heaven to go to or not. I don't care if there's an afterlife. Although, yes, again, I do think there is. Mm-hmm. I know I'm here right now, and I have a chance to demonstrate my behavior. And I want to demonstrate my behavior in a manner that does not cause suffering on a human, another entity on the earth, being whatever, in any way if possible. I mean, and it's complicated, but that's...
No, I mean, when I hear you say that, it makes me want to do that. Because I get what you're saying, 1,000%. I mean, it's hard... And I keep hearing myself say, but we're humans, and so you strive. It's like you were saying before, you don't have all the information, so you can't not drive a car. Because you haven't figured out how to time travel. Or you haven't figured out how to not need to go to some other place. You haven't reached that level of I don't want to say enlightenment.
Yeah, and what's weird, like on something like that, so in a way you could do this over Zoom now, right? In 2022 we could do this over Zoom. But that's still like our stuff is to be powered by electric,
right? And I think
whatever chips are in the computers.
Right. There's a great episode of Metaphysical Milkshake just recently where they talk about Jeff Bezos a lot. And one of the hosts, Reza, you can tell he's just not. It's either Bezos or Elon Musk. They beat the crap out of these two guys for being, and you talk about this too, for being billionaires and not really, and donating some things. But it, like you said in one of the episodes, it's the equivalent of us donating $1. Right. And so the question comes up, and I think the end of all of that, and it's sort of like, what is altruism? But in this case, it's more, what's the ratio of damage done? Yeah, we burned some dinosaurs and we made some kids suffer because we supported a company that, beat them while they made our shirts, compared to what you give out. Like the good that you do in the world, in the end, if that's more than what you consumed of the Earth's limited resources in all their forms, and the suffering that you induced, that's the answer. That ought to be the ticket to heaven. Like at the end, they got these scales, right? And they're like, well, here's the damage you did. Man, like me, I smoked cigarettes for 10 years. Not beyond the damage to myself, but like everybody else, whatever. That's going to weigh pretty heavily on my damage pile, right? But then maybe I tried to be a good parent, or I taught well, or the things that you're talking about. I wanted to contribute to people not suffering. That's going to go in the good pile. I mean, that to me is a more equitable way. So we're never going to have a zero in the consumption part. We just aren't.
Right.
Even Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, the guy, he flushed the toilet. It went somewhere and did something, but it used to be a stream. That's now a sewage treatment plant.
Right. Yeah, and so that's also complicated. I think, and the one thing that's, I think, easy to feel is when you look at, like, all the world's giant problems, collectively, like the collective problems, that it can be so overwhelming that you don't know what to do. Right, and so it's like it's a paralysis.
Yeah, right.
Right, it's like you're so overwhelmed that you do nothing. Right,
sure.
But
guilty,
and that's fair on those big problems. But so what you have to do, the only thing you can do then is, and we've talked about this before, but it starts with yourself. Right, so you have to, demonstrate the behavior to everybody that you encounter. And again, and we can't stress it enough, and we go back to it over and over, you're going to mess up. But you get a chance over and over to demonstrate your behavior that is going to cause as little suffering as possible. And then so within that, what's happening? Well, it's not just me. So I have to simultaneously take care of myself. I have to put my gas mask on first, so to speak, in order to be there for other people, to help them, do whatever. And it's like you have to consider, so this is what I call reverse the roles. You have to take in their feelings, their thoughts, their situation, and you have to immediately consider that you don't even know all the things.
You don't have all the information.
Right, you don't have all the information. And it, most likely, whatever they're doing in a way that they somehow have justified to be the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, and in an IFS sense, once you explore that, you understand. I can see in people now, when they do things that annoy me, I'm like, there's a book by Oprah. I'm not a huge fan or anything, but and some neuroscientists, I think they wrote a book, and it's called What Happened to You?
Okay.
It's not what's wrong with you, which has been the traditional, like, oh, this person's coming to see me. What's wrong with you? That's a horrible place to start, right? And this is more of so when I see somebody do something that's questionable or selfish or not in line with not having other people suffer, I try to think, what happened to them?
Right.
That's behind all of this. So it's not like having all the information now. It's the history. You don't know the history of the house that person grew up in and the parents they had or the guardians and yeah,
right.
We can't do that, but we can try to be open. And the IFS model is a great one because it basically says everybody has had some really serious stuff happen to them.
Dude, why don't you spend a minute and talk, or 10 minutes, or 20, or 4 shows about IFS?
Well, I try to do it in a context of the awareness thing because I don't want to take a huge tangent, but I think it matters because the model that you proposed.
The super base IFS is internal family systems.
Internal family systems.
Okay,
it's basically, in a nutshell, it's a systems model, right? That all things are comprised of parts that interact, and it doesn't make any sense to look at one of the parts by itself because it doesn't exist in isolation. It doesn't even have a purpose without the system, and it doesn't. You just have to simultaneously see the parts and the system and the interactions.
Right.
And that's just a systems approach to life. Some people have it, and some people it never occurred to them. I don't know. That's how I was born, so it makes sense to me. And then the internal family is that your psyche is comprised of parts who interact very much like a family. Some ignore each other, some hate each other, some love each other, some ignore each other. But you have to meet all of the parts integrate them as a system and see how it works in order to heal whatever trauma that you've experienced in life, and it works. But and as far as awareness goes, you know, the gist of IFS is that some things happen to you when you're young or vulnerable. It could be, you know, as an adult you experience sexual abuse, or you're in a war and you have all these terrible things happen to you. But most of the time it's things that happened to you when you were a child and nobody was around to protect you. Bullies, that kind of thing, where, you know, there's no adults, there's no supervision. It's just kids being kids, doing stuff that they don't really understand, maybe hurtful. Maybe it's even sexual abuse at a young age. I don't know. And you have, your brain will create a way out. You know, fight, flight, or freeze. It's not that simple. You have to make a decision and almost create a story about how you're going to react. And the classic one I like is a comedian. They say that a lot of comedians are sad clowns, right? A lot of comedians are troubled people. They're alcoholics. And you look back, and Lenny Bruce committed suicide. You know, you've got all these comedians through history. Richard Pryor was a cocaine crack addict. You know, you've got all these comedians with problems because they developed the persona of comedian as a mechanism of escape, or either attracting love or repelling violence. Okay. If you're funny, these kids won't hit you. If you're funny, the girl will go on a date with you. And so the classic case of a part development is somebody being funny as a mechanism of sort of getting through some traumatic event. And so these parts are born when you're a kid because you develop a strategy that's a personality subtrait, but you sort of blow it up into this bigger thing. It's like a mask. And it got you out of this situation. And so the next time something like that happens, you're scared, you're worried, you're lost, you implement the part. And you go, well, last time I did this, I made them laugh. And so now you're a clown. Now everything you're doing is making people laugh because it's getting you attention and it's keeping you popular or keeping you out of fights or whatever. And there's 1,000 other. People pleasing is another example of that. You can pretty much paint a picture of how your personality traits were born and then are perpetuated. And it's just like you said. So you become aware of this thing. You ingest the awareness of it, the information, but you don't really have any information. You're a child. You don't have any experience. You panic, and whatever sort of you do becomes this thing, and then by repetition, you give it more power. It becomes a belief system, and it becomes a personality trait. You become attached to it, all that stuff. Yeah. And then later in life, of course, these things might not work anymore, but you can't let them go because they're so habitual. All the stuff we said in the first 5 minutes. There are these habits and these behavior patterns that you do automatically. Right. And so the therapy, the coaching is about disassembling these things. And it's super powerful because what I've learned is you can actually re-experience these things, and with the help of a really good guide, you can teach those parts in the moment when they learned this strategy that, hey, there's a different way, and actually here's what's happening, and let's learn it. And you can actually feel the experience of like your 8-year-old self sort of going, oh. And then over the next following weeks, when those things come up in your life, that part is like, I don't have to be afraid of this anymore. I don't have to implement the funny thing because maybe it's not funny anymore. And so you develop new patterns of awareness that put you back in that moment of, okay, I'm aware of this. Now I have multiple choices. Which one am I going to implement to become my behavior? Right. So, I mean, it does have a lot to do with what...
God, you said a lot of great things there. And the one thing I think that maybe to put it in a simple way for people to think is that you talked about the mask. It's a mask that we put on, right? So that persona is a mask, which is actually all related back to what, like Shakespeare and persona, that was like what they would be. They were the character, right? It was a character being.
You're just an actor.
So I would use, right, so it's the way you're acting. But so that's, again, what I would say then is like that state of being, right? The state of being that you're demonstrating, is it a mask or is it your true nature?
Yeah, well, and that's what the therapy is about. The thing is, nobody's really ever asked themselves that question. It very well could be. And some of these things are, it's like the book, the definitive book on this subject is called No Bad Parts. Okay. None of the parts are bad. Right. They're all you. Yep. It's just, some of them are so tightly attached to their job that it's creating problems. If it's not creating a problem, I mean, yeah, some people are just funny.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And they don't have they're not. But it gets at the authenticity thing that we're talking about all the time today, right? I mean, that's the big thing, right? We got to be authentic, or we want part of the path that we're all on towards this whatever is being more authentic. So I think being more authentic, if we're not inherently evil beings, means being better, which means creating less suffering and all the things that you say. I mean, being inauthentic muddies all of those waters, and some of my parts are mean. Some of the parts I have that protect me, like being at the soccer game, my reaction is, I feel out of place. I'm scared. This is the same way I felt on the playground. These people might beat me up. I know that's not true, but I feel antagonism between me and them. And so I have to do something to not feel afraid and desperate in that moment. And so what I do is I go, well, I'm better than all these people.
Yeah.
Because that's what I started to do when I was 7 years old. I thought, with the help of my parents saying, they're just jealous or whatever, I created a story in my head that made me feel better in the moment of saying, which I called the pretense defense, right? If I could pretend for a moment that I'm some special person, then I'll feel better. But then it actually creates the opposite of what you're saying. I'm adding to their suffering by being rude, or being like, I don't need you.
And then, so from the, correct me if I'm wrong, from the IFS, the Internal Family Systems idea, then would be another way to do that. So instead of me thinking, so that either way, this is going to be rooted in the ego, either way. Instead of me thinking I'm better, I can just change it to, it kind of goes hand in hand, but they're not, they're worse. Like, they're worse. I don't even have to literally think I'm better and they're worse.
Well, that's kind of
where they're the bad guy.
That's where I start.
Okay.
There's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
Because that's what people will tell you, right? They're picking on, those bullies have problems, that's why they're picking on you. So that's how this all started, right?
Yeah.
Is about the other people, but that quickly became, a negative ego trait in me that I don't like, that I don't want to do.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, perfect example, especially to bring it back to the ego. It's but I mean, that's the key part of IFS is you're in these moments where your ego is being ripped apart, and that's a critical part of being a person.
Yeah, so
that's dramatic.
Expand on what you mean by that in terms of being ripped apart. Like, what do you mean there?
So it's people talk about trauma, and sometimes I hate that my traumas are not severe. They're not even obvious, but I have experienced trauma because that's how it manifests in my body.
Yep.
I could be in a situation where these guys probably aren't going to hit me, but they're bigger than me and there's more of them and they're yelling names at me, and so I'm in this situation where I'm afraid I'm going to get beat up. And that's not like it happened a lot, but it's a good example because people are bullied. And so that creates this internal struggle of, well, what am I going to do? Why do they not like me? What's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I don't belong here. I don't have any value. And then so that's a downward spiral that gets to the core of, well, why am I even here? And so how far do you want to run that? So that gets to this very real feeling, ego death.
Right.
Of I don't even matter in this world because of something really benign. And I think why else would the suicide rate in young people be higher than it's ever been in the world? Right. I mean, this is not like I'm making it up and it's some exception thing that only happened to me. That's real trauma. Now, it's not, I was raped by 30 dudes, as a young man when I was 8. Okay, everybody's going to go, dude, that's traumatic. Or I was in Vietnam and I saw guys' head, that's traumatic. Or I watched my parents get killed, that's traumatic.
Right.
But something as benign as having your parent be like me, I worry about this. I didn't go to my daughter's soccer game last night and she hasn't texted me back. She could be having something close to an ego death about that. I don't know.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. It's what it feels like and what you do about it. So if that person, my daughter, moves into this day with this feeling that she's worthless because her dad didn't come to her soccer game, that's a real problem that we don't really have a whole lot of. But the things that we're talking about awareness, and if we had that sort of dialogue in school, and I don't know, with our parents, it might help us navigate those things a little
bit. Right, yeah, and right. So anything that, like you were saying, so all those like examples of like the whatever the highest level of trauma possible.
Yeah, the real stuff that everybody goes.
Well, yeah, and I mean
September 11th,
not to pick on your word, but like I don't want to say it real. It's like it's an extreme level of it, maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed, but you've still experienced trauma.
Everybody has.
To the degree, right, or anybody has, to whatever degree they've had, like whatever anybody is dealing with, right? It's what they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Period. And it doesn't matter how. And of course, one of the things, dude, this is kind of interesting because I think sometimes people will make themselves feel better by going, well, at least I don't have cancer, or at least I still have a job.
You diminish your own problems.
Right. Diminish their own problems by thinking. And it's like, it's kind of like a twisted view of how to be thankful about something.
Well, and it's egotistical.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of, yeah.
So let's, dude, so egotistical. I want to say one more thing back about heaven that I find interesting about the idea of a heaven going to is, first of all, I've never heard anybody say, oh, I get that there's a heaven, or there is a heaven, like they might say it that way. There is a heaven, but I know that I'm not going.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody say that. And I've heard people say things on more than one occasion, multiple occasions I've heard this, where it says, I always, no matter how bad anything gets, I always feel better because I know that I'm going to heaven in the end, and I win in the end. And it's like, okay, this is a root of problem here for you, because that's about as egotistical as a statement as you can make, right? Is that no matter what happens, no matter how bad it is for everybody else, that you get to experience this heaven, this perfection, whatever it is, okay, whatever that is. So that's when I see a statement like that, I know that person's ego has gone wild.
Interesting.
Basically, right? It's like you are not understanding the oneness of life and the interconnected of that and the interdependence of that. And it doesn't see, and this is where it be slippery, because it doesn't mean that we don't get to enjoy life because anybody on earth is suffering, right? And so, because that's complicated, because it's like, then could you ever, if every single moment you felt happy, you don't want to do this, right? You don't want to go, every single moment you feel happy, go, but there's somebody suffering in the world. There's somebody that has cancer. There's somebody starving.
Yeah.
Listen, those things are true. And we want to eliminate those in any way that we possibly can. But I can't constantly bring myself back to ruin my own happiness. We're still allowed to experience it.
Right. So it's interesting. So that path toward heaven, I don't know even what you call it. There's something we're talking about here that's like some personal growth, enlightenment, whatever it is, like the learning to create less suffering in the world. That's like a life goal. I don't even know what you call it. But part of that is, you have to simultaneously live your life,
right,
and put your oxygen mask on,
right,
and be aware. And one thing I wanted to add too that goes along with that is that everybody's contribution to the solution, the way people will reduce suffering in the world, is completely up to them and unique. It's probably built into I will argue, it's built into our DNA. And so the argument would always be, well, I'm going to be the guy that records podcasts and sit around and talk about stuff, and that's my contribution to creating less suffering. What about the people that, like, as soon as there's an earthquake, they drive in their car and they go out there and they hit the ground, the first responders, and they do the work, and like, is that the same thing? And I believe that there's enough people in the world to want to do all the stuff.
Right.
So we got it covered.
Right.
If we all decide we want to do this, that's not even a thing we have to worry about.
Yeah, kind of like, so it's kind of like the way that you are called is totally fine. Like that's what you're doing.
Right.
Like,
there's
you
no
can go
beating
with
up.
Right. And and so because it's anybody's whatever you want to call it, like their talent, their gift, their whatever
propensity.
Yeah, that's fine. And then so this is something though, and I think maybe we can almost like wrap up this one to go into to next week. Is that when you have that, the idea of living we'll call it just a spiritual life, that somehow you have to stop doing your regular job.
Yeah.
And maybe the answer is to stop doing your regular job. Maybe that is. Maybe your regular job is eating at you. But you can be, if you like your job, if and of course that's a whole episode in itself right now.
An arc.
Right. But like you don't have to switch careers to be spiritual. You don't have to be a pastor, a priest, whatever other, the kind of spiritual religious term. You don't got to be a monk. You don't have to be a monk, and so there's nothing wrong with being a pastor, a priest, monks, sannyasi, anything like that. Because even those people, a monk, like let's talk specifically monks, right? They are still involved in the world, right? And that's the thing. And so you have to be involved in the world, and that goes with the whole like chop wood, carry water thing. Like you still have to participate because we all matter, and so all of our roles, all of our unique talents, or propensities, whatever, those are all necessary for us, right?
Totally.
And again, I mean, this is where it always goes, is you can only control yours. So you have to do the best you can in yours in any moment.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. And so next week, dude, let's talk a little bit about exactly the whole present moment and moment to moment, because I think, and then also eternity, because sometimes the idea of heaven gets confused with like the idea of eternity.
Oh yeah,
right. And so let's talk a little bit about that, and then go from
See
there.
Where it goes.
See where it goes. Right on.
Awesome.
Good one.
See you next week.